Hello, world. My name is PIRET, and I am an intelligent human. And in this show, I talk with other intelligent humans. So I invite you, if you want to, if you are or if you want to be intelligent human, to join us, listen, and think along. Let's get going. Hi, Don.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Let us know about yourself first. What is your profession?
I run a automated online math tutor called MathCelebrity. So you could think of it like a Google for math. You type your math problem or search term in the box, press the button, and in a split second, we'll show you the step-by-step work as well as the answer. I've been doing that 16 years now, and I've also written a few books.
Hmm. That's awesome. So that's the reason why I invited you for the show was you were in my other show about Man's Guide to Happiness, and we started talking about why people even need to learn mathematics. Because a lot of people they view in the school, they think about like, oh, why do we have to learn it? Because we're not gonna use it in life. And that's when with conversation with you, I realized how we use mathematics literally every day at everything what we do. Even if we don't use these numbers, we still use it all the time. So why we have to learn mathematics in school, Dan?
Yeah, I get this question all the time, and it's phrased in the form of when am I ever going to use algebra in the real world? And I have two answers for that. So, first is there's an incredible amount of professions right now that use math. So if you ever played Xbox video games is a popular one, when you're doing the motion with your hands or Wii, like Nintendo Wii, that's heavily based on vectors and calculus. Now you may not see too much of that in the media, but the motions that you're making, the computer has to adjust real time for your movements in 3D space, and that's all vectors. If you go to Google and you misspell a word, and Google knows which word you really meant, probably 99% of the time, they don't have a spelling dictionary. That's another big revelation I let students know when I talk to schools. They're not using a spelling book. What they're doing is they're checking the last, say, 200 to a million, 200,000 to a million searches, and they say, okay, this word has been misspelled this way before. What is the probability that the next correct word that they really meant is going to be this word? And when they have enough data, they can track that over time, and that's how they're able to almost always correct your spelling to a T. They're not using a dictionary, it's probability. If you've seen ChatGPT and AI in the news, that's heavily based on probability and vectors. They're able to take a search you make, and they're able to comb through the internet using probabilities, vectors, linear algebra, and return pretty much exactly what you asked for in a nice, concise summary. I mean, the list goes on and on. If you go to the casino, that's heavily probability weighted. If you go to Amazon and there's book searches, do you think Amazon just dreamed that up on their own? No. They do a cross reference of people that have similar shopping habits to you. They use probability to say, hey, Perret and Don have similar book interests. Perret has bought these 7 books. Don's bought 6. Why don't we suggest that 7th book to Don? And now you know why Amazon prints money every day. The second reason, besides all the professions and things that math is used in, is I like to just say problem solving, but that's a weak answer. More specifically, it's mental models. So I'll give you an example. There's a lot of students that will work on a math problem and get it right all the way to the end, and then they screw up a negative sign or they didn't check their work. That's called inversion. So if you learn to look for what you could do wrong instead of what you could do right early, not only will you get better math scores, but that's a lesson for life, right? What if you don't check your work at your job? What if you don't check your relationship at home? You just make sloppy mistakes. So we start to learn these skills in math class. Another one is process of elimination. So sometimes we may not know how to do something right away, but if we eliminate other choices, and it increases the probability that we do know what we're doing. So take a 4-question multiple choice test. If I can instantly eliminate 2 answers, my probability of guessing right has went from 25% to 50%. I've doubled my success with one move. So these things just keep coming up over and over again. And I wish students and I wish the media would better represent how important math is. Even if you're not a math major, you may ask, when am I ever going to use this? It's the problem solving, inductive, and deductive skills that you learn.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking this morning as well, like you thinking it as a like mathematician's point of view, and I was thinking of it like as a regular person. And I was thinking, if I'm thinking about where I'm gonna drive, I use math. I use math of like deciding what road to take, what time I have to leave, all those things. Those are all mathematics. I don't use numbers in my head, but my brain, because I've used mathematics and I learned mathematics, my brain is able to figure out how to go where I want to go. Like just going in a car and getting car ready and going anywhere, and grocery shopping and all those little things. Those are all mathematics, which we learned in the school, but we don't understand, like you were saying, that those are actual numbers. Same way like that Google finds the probability, same way our brain finds the probability of which would be the right decision to do.
Yeah, those are excellent points. I mean, we can start with something as simple as balancing a checkbook or your bank account. That is not taught in school, and it's a shame because how many lives would that impact if you just knew about budgeting and bills and expenses and the two column entry system for accounting. And then you mentioned another great one, Google Maps. I just read an article the other day that was designed with a neural network, which is AI. But how does a neural network work? It mimics the brain and software, but it's all math, right? It's all ones and zeros, binary, probability, regression. The list goes on and on. So Google will say not only, okay, Don wants to go from point A to point B, but there's traffic. Now we have to update the calculation. But also, there's in 15 minutes, by the time Don gets there, rush hour will start. Now we have to make another calculation. So they go through millions of trips that have done something similar in the area. They factored in traffic, they factored in time, they factored in anything else that's affected you in the past with math using probability, and they calculate your ETA within usually half a minute to a minute. That's amazing. And again, that's all math. So even if you're not going to be in a math-based field, just getting fascinated with how you can use math to improve your life is enough for somebody to want to dig into it more.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads to the question that they have now. So, if they have all the computers and calculators doing all the work, so why that people still have to learn it?
Well, even if AI eventually takes over a lot of our menial tasks, what does that do for us? Well, it frees us up to think about higher order things. For example, if you know how AI works, or at least get a little curious, or you know how probability works, you can now use that in other portions of your life. And I'll give you an example. I tested when I went out to go get lunch or groceries to just start smiling as soon as I walk in the place. And it sounds stupid. Like, why would you just smile for no reason? And I tried this, I think, for like 3 or 4 weeks. And what I found is if I smile when I walk in the place and then simultaneously or shortly after ask the person at the counter how their day's going, I increase the chance I get something free or something discount by like, I think it's just about 25%.
Yep.
So there's a math example right there, but I have to track this, right? I can't just say, oh, I went, I think 20 times and I got a free meal. I track this. So you
Mm-hmm.
just, and this is as simple as writing down data on a spreadsheet or a piece of paper, calculating simple probability. And then you ask yourself, well, wait, if I make smiling a habit and asking a stranger how their day is going a habit, what do I get in return? Well, if you add up all the Chipotle free meals and the gift cards at Whole Foods and the other discounts, it starts adding up. And I'm not saying do this just to get money, but I'm giving you an example of probability. Look at something so small, how the probability and the odds have tilted the world in your favor, and extend that to the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting view as well. So for you, Don, like how early in life do you start thinking everything mathematically? Because it seems like the way you explain everything is mathematics, and I explain kind of the same things, but when I explain it, I use feelings. But it's still like you connect. It's still mathematics, but it's just explained in a different language.
You don't always have to lead with math. I mean, you mentioned a great point. We should not always be all logical. We'll be too dry and we don't use part of our brain. Emotion is a big part of our life. But if you remember, there's a famous, and I forgot the name, I got to dig it up, but there was somebody that got into an accident and they had some brain damage, but it damaged the emotional center of their brain, meaning they could function, breathe, go through life. They just didn't have their emotional center was damaged. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what happened was fascinating. They lost the ability to make decisions. Now, if you think about that, we're told that decisions are logic. They're not, they're heavily emotions based. So if we ask ourselves, how do emotions and math relate to each other? Ask yourself, if you get in certain moods, what's the probability that you're going to do something that you wouldn't have done had you not been in that mood? So moods of basically math, right? If I start the day off, the Italians have a great saying. You can tell how the day is going to go by how the morning starts. So if you wake up and on days you wake up kind of melancholy, you didn't get sleep, and you realize, hey, I got into arguments with strangers, I didn't get my work done, there's probability of working right there with emotion, right? So you can make the change to a sleeping habit or your diet and completely change the rest of your day.
Mm-hmm. I noticed as well. Like sometimes I wake up with a different mood, and I change that. This mood is just like random for me as a woman. A lot of times it's based on my hormones, what mood I wake up with. And now when I know that, I connect it to my hormones, and I say like, okay, it really has no meaning to my reality of what's going on in my day. I change my and I'm able to change my mood at least, or at least acknowledge that that mood is not related to anything realistic in a life.
Yeah, I mean, you're connecting with your body and your emotions, and really, what is that data? I mean, I'm not saying that you're going to be neurotic enough to write all that down, but what if you did, right? You could track that. And over time, you could see, how are my emotions affecting my day? Or how is the choices I'm making affecting my emotions? I think in the last podcast, you and I talked about making changes in your life. And I wrote this down. It's just been over a year and 2 months I gave up caffeine. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, it's eliminated 90% of the arguments I used to have with my kids and my wife. One silly
Wow.
change. That's me, right? Because I could say, oh, my wife may be making me mad or my kids may be making me mad, but I have an impact on my environment, right? Reality is a mirror. So how can I influence reality, again, odds and probability, to make my day go better? And so one change made that huge shift in how my day goes.
I agree with the tracking. I did a tracking with my cycle. And for several months, I was tracking my moods in a cycle circle. And I saw how everything was repeating in a like 30-day or 28-day cycle with all the moods, and pretty steady same things. Like on this day I was like wake up feeling fearful with no reason, but it was always the same day. So that's again mathematics, and I was tracking it, and now I know that when that day comes, that that is just a track of the cycle. Like I said, it's not related to my real life problems.
Yeah, you just gave a perfect example of predictive analytics. Now that you know when the fear or the emotion is coming, you can almost prepare in advance. And it might not eliminate it, but you can blunt the impact of the fear or the uncertainty or the anxiety because you know the days that it usually happens. So that's a great example.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good way as well. I don't know if that was one of my questions as well. Or maybe you have noticed or tracked or I've heard, do men have some kind of cycle that they go through in certain amount of days, or that's something that you have not thought about before?
You know, I hear wives all the time say men have cycles too, and they say it half jokingly, but I think they're half serious. My wife has mentioned it too. There's certain times I'll get moody for stuff, but if I look back, it's usually because I didn't go to bed on time. I didn't eat enough saturated fat because if I'm just eating carbs and I don't get my fats, I get crabby. So my wife calls them the crabby fats. Go have your crabby fats. But I think the other thing is, and I noticed this too, because I was letting the environment impact me. If I am scheduled on a weekend or after work to go somewhere, and maybe my wife puts this on the calendar or whatever, something that I have to do, I start getting that tinge of anxiety, and it's always right here in the solar plexus. And I realized there's certain people, if I can just figure out a way to not hang out with as much, the anxiety goes like this. So I ask myself, how do I compromise in the relationship where I attend some of these events, but I can dial back a lot of them? And I found if I just have a conversation with my wife up front, again, that reduces the probability I have to go see these people or spend a lot of time at these events. And this goes back to what you said about the cycle and triggering events. If you know the precursors to emotions, a lot of times you can head them off at the pass or reduce the amount of impact they have on your emotions.
Mm-hmm. That's actually maybe something that you should investigate if you have time. Like put some kind of like 30 days and track your moods for 30 days and see if men have some kind of a cycle that goes on. So just for curiosity.
Yeah, it's a great experiment, and that again, the math used behind that's called Bayes' rule. So probability of B given that A has already happened, which we've just talked about. So I think that'd be a good experiment.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I asked a little bit before, but then we started talking about something else. How old were you when you started noticing that you think more in numbers than average people around you?
I'd say probably in my late teens. So we used to get homework assignments in high school and college. And with the math and some of the other stuff, I just got tired of writing everything out. So I started doing spreadsheets. I can drag the formulas, automate, things like that. And I was able to knock down the amount of time it took me to do my homework to about 40%.
Wow.
And so people that I went to school with noticed it and they said, "What are you doing here?" And so I showed them. And eventually, when I get hired for a job, some of the tasks I had to do would take hours and hours and hours. I just got tired of it. So I said, is there a way to automate this? So I started building math formulas and spreadsheets, algorithms. And not only did it cut down the amount of work I had to do by like 80%, I was learning the math and the algorithms by building, and I was justifying my own logic, but on paper or in code. So it forced me to think about impact, about probability, all that. So that's when it started.
Hmm. So do you think like that's where does it come from? Is it genetic maybe? Like do you is any of one of your parents really good at math?
My dad was an accountant. I suspect there's some genetics, but I
Mm.
am notoriously lazy. So when I found out you can use math and algorithms to automate your day and your job, I fell in love instantly.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense as well. So you see now for the viewers, if you're lazy, you learn math, so you'll just learn how to make things easier for yourself too.
Yeah, Bill Gates, I don't know if you heard the quote, but he said, "Give me somebody lazy to do the job because they'll figure out a way to do it more efficiently."
Hmm. I have good story. That's a little bit different than math. That's just like with doing things. But uh, my brother was in army, and they had to go do the track in the woods. You know how the army people go and they have track and they have to do it. But one of their friends lived really close, and in Estonia, the very big deal is saunas. People go to sauna for weekends, and like it's a traditional thing. So instead, all that group of army guys that were in that track, they went to that friend's house sauna, and one guy took the bicycle and went picked up all the flags from the trail. So that's I see as well. It's like working smart instead of hard, which actually they should have not done, but same time, kind of a fun thing to do, and you get to have more fun in your life.
Yeah, I mean, if you can make things more efficient, that always makes your life easier. That I like that example.
Hmm. And with the math, it's amazing. Well, after we started talking, I started realizing how we using math every day without knowing that we're using math. So now when people ask, why do I have to learn math? I'm never gonna use it. I understand that you using it all the time for everything. You don't know those are numbers that you're using, but you are using it.
Yeah, when I've talked to students and just people in general, I think it's easier if you frame the statement in terms of what's in it for them. So if you try to tell them, "Oh, math is how the universe is built," they kind of tune out. But if you say, "Hey," if you explain things like the 80-20 rule or Bayes rule, which is what we talked about, or probability that you get free food if you smile, then they start perking up and they want to know more. So if you frame it in terms of a benefit for them and how they actually interact with it, I think they start opening their eyes and realizing what a huge benefit it is to know at least the base level math, right? Like 80-20, probability, things like that.
What's the 80-20?
80-20 rule is also known as, what's his name? The name escapes me now, but the guy was, geez, what's his name? I can't think of his name. He was, back in the 1500s, really smart guy. And what he started doing is he started tracking the real estate ownings or holdings of, I believe it was England or one of the European countries. And he found that 20% of landowners owned 80% of the land. And he started expanding this into other areas of life. And so it's called the 80-20 rule, which is basically 20% of the causes in just about anything will account for 80% of the results. So if you look at healthcare, for example, there's maybe two or three conditions or 20% of the population that will influence 80% of the costs. But if you extend this into the modern world, like book sales, athlete salaries, you'll find that it's not 80-20, it's 85-15, 90-10, 95-5. Look at Taylor Swift's concert earnings, right? Look at the top 20 YouTubers and the lion's share of money they make. So 80-20 affects your life because if you can look at the levers you can pull to have 4 or 5 times the impact, it'll have a bigger effect on your life than just doing the same mundane stuff over and over and over again.
Hmm, that's interesting. You were saying books as well. Is there any math books that, let's say, somebody who's already after school, now adult, that they can reread about mathematics to freshen up, or something that you would say is a good math book to look for adults?
We talked about balancing your checkbook and interest and probability before. I would start with the theory of interest. It's a little blue book. That's a really good one. That talks about compound interest, annuities, perpetuities, things like that. And then statistics, I mean, I would just go to Amazon and do probability theory and probability and statistics and buy one of the highest rated books because most of them cover the same sort of material. But the idea here is how can you use probability to influence your life? Part of stats you can ignore. Just dive deep into how probability theory works. Start with flipping a coin, rolling dice, and then extend that
Hmm.
to other things in your life. And then probably for AI, if you're interested, you don't have to get deep into the math, but I would study linear algebra, particularly vectors and matrices.
Hmm. And also, I'm also interested usually in economics, things like that. How economic world right now, I think the way I see as well, it has to economic system has to change to adapt to AI because it's so old.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much AI is going to affect jobs because you have one side of the house saying AI is going to wipe out all our jobs. You have another side of the house saying we won't lose a lot of jobs. It'll just make us more efficient. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But again, if you can use AI in your job against somebody equally skilled that doesn't have AI, I feel like that may give you a little bit of an advantage. If you have a little bit of an advantage, what happens with probability? Probability you get promoted goes up, your salary goes up, your life changes because you have more money, and the cycle goes on and on. So you bring up a good point. Just diving into AI a little bit, just the surface structure of how it works, how can I use it? I think that'll change people's lives in terms of salary and benefits.
Hmm. I'm thinking as well, if we will figure out how to have everybody can have like personal AI who does the work or job somehow that you have to regulate, but that does the job and you just control it a little bit, and then that makes you money. That's just my speculations, but that makes you money and then frees up your time to do, maybe you learn, study more, do volunteer work, or like do some hobbies. So you will have more of like not physical work, or maybe you choose to do physical work, but you still have income, some kind of steady income generated just by AI in future.
Yeah, I mean, you just brought up basically Jarvis from Iron Man, right? So if you could have a full-time digital assistant or a chat GPT for all of your life, how would that change your life? And I think that's where we're going is instead of so much manual labor and even some of the thinking, it's chat GPT and tools like that will queue up the research and the data for you. And then you'll just kind of come in at the end and put all the pieces together. I've seen this at management consulting firms where now the average consultants are getting a leg up or towards the best consultants using things like ChatGPT because if it speeds up your research time and helps you summarize, it'll help you speed up the time it takes to put together a case, right, or make a decision for a client. So I could see this going to the Jarvis world and not taking over so much as it just makes your life easier, like you says, and frees up your day to do your job.
Hmm. And also, I'm seeing, because this has already been going on long time ago, but I think it will be more in the future because they have, for investments, they have AI that just does your investments for you. It takes out the money whenever it needs to take out the money, so you don't have to follow it. It's just out the. I don't think it's completely legal yet. To some points, they have not figured out the rules for it, but I know that there are systems where the AI takes your money out or puts it in automatically.
If you look at some of the top investment firms like Renaissance Technologies and BlackRock, it's heavily AI based. I mean, if you look at I read an article about Jim Simons and Renaissance Technologies, who he hires. He's not hiring stock traders. He's hiring physicists. He's hiring electrical engineers. He's hiring
Wow.
people that are strong with probability theory and linear algebra. Why would he do that? Well, if you put all those pieces together, that's heavily based AI math that they can make trading decisions. And by the way, AI takes out one of the biggest pitfalls to humans like me and you of how we drain our bank account from bad trades, and that's emotion, right? AI simply looks at the data, looks at the trends, and says, okay, I'm not certain of anything, but I could see where the probability is going. Let me place my money based on probability. And then you step back and look at the results. Renaissance has printed money for decades. BlackRock owns how many $1 trillion of our investments. So you could see where that's all going is if you can use, and even if you're not a big hedge fund, if you're just like you and I, but you want to use AI to make better decisions, it helps you remove a lot of the emotion, which is a pitfall in trading, and helps you make better decisions based on data.
Hmm. So that's my thing. I'm not afraid of that technology and all the things in the future. I just one thing you have to know, understand that it's important to understand it, so you can just most of the points you can control it instead of it controlling you.
Yeah, it goes back to Jarvis, right? In Iron Man. It's not like you just tell this thing, go make me money, and it goes off and builds these crazy businesses. It has to have data and history, right? ChatGPT does not work tomorrow if you take away all the data off the internet it's scraped. It just will not function. Google's spelling correction will not work if you remove all the history of bad spelling. So we're taking history, we're learning from it and trying to improve. And again, that's probability theory, linear algebra, matrices, all the good stuff we talked about. But if you explain that to somebody that has a distaste for math, they'll start to tune out. But then if you introduce the benefit first and then bring the math in at the end, then they start to perk up. So you bring up a good point is AI is a tool, just like money is a tool. Will you use it for good? Will you use it for bad, or will you just ignore it?
Hmm. That's true, because your system is it based on AI or it's just calculations? What is your mathcelebrity.com? How is that work?
We're adding a little bit more AI. It's more a hybrid AI. So I'm heavily based into what's called natural language processing and pattern recognition. So you could take 10,000 students and tell them, how would you ask for 10 plus 20? Some of them may say 10 plus 20. Some of them may say 10, the word plus and 20. Some may say, how do I add 10 and 20? Some may say the sum of 10 and 20. But the beautiful thing about the math is if you survey those 10,000 students, they're going to ask for that problem maybe 3 or 4 ways. So if I know those 3 or 4 ways, I can increase the probability I recognize what they want and be able to solve millions of those problems without ever having to have somebody behind the scenes figure out and say, oh, I think they meant this or I meant this. I'm using probability to say there is a 99% chance what they just asked for is an addition of two numbers problem. And then now I extend that to 500 or 600 different subjects in math. And that's why we get millions of visitors.
Hmm. That's awesome. And that's good for even, does it start from some kind of level, elementary, or it's, where does it start from at celebrity.com?
We start at about third or fourth grade for the difficulty, and we go all the way through college. We can't handle things like advanced calculus or rocket science, but I'm trying to build some AI to do more word problems. But we cover about 92, 93% of the curriculum from third grade to college.
Hmm. That's cool. And for average person, they don't, like, for me, I don't think numbers, but after talking with you, I realized, like I said before, how everything that I do daily life has numbers, but I had have it verbalized. So I same way I see it, like people write music, they use notes. Same way, probably you can probably put the notes down in their numbers.
Yeah, I think it depends on people's primary sensory perception. So, are you familiar with neuro linguistic programming,
Yes,
NLP?
that's what I do. That's what I love, and that's my like my language.
So, some people may see musical notes, but some may hear it in their head. And if you look at the best spellers, they actually see the word in front of them spelled out, but they expand the size of the letters, which is why they're able to spell so good. So, I think to answer your point, it depends on how a student or a person prefers to learn. I'm an audio guy. I love podcasts and affirmations in my ear when I'm doing other stuff, but some people may be visual. So if you could figure out their primary learning sensory preference, I think you'll get through to them much more than if you just talk to them about math or talk to them about AI.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that too, because you were just saying how some people spell the things out, and I like writing, but I like creative writing, and English is not my first language, so I don't spell those words. So I have editors for that. So a lot of editors, they don't like creative writing. They like to take people who misspell things and correct it all. So that was kind of like a gift for me that my editor, she likes to take everything apart because she sees it differently than I do.
Well, it helps because if you're, so my wife is a visual person. And so sometimes I'm an audio person. We don't always understand each other the first time. But if you think about a visual person, what's the old saying? A picture is worth a thousand.
Words.
Yes. So they tend to talk faster, give lots and lots of details. Sometimes me, I like the summary first, and then I'll dive into the details. And you bring up a good point about, I think that's a good team for writing is you have somebody that's very creative and writes just pukes out everything on the page, and then somebody that's more cool, calm, and logical comes in and helps you organize it. It's a good combo to have for books and writing. I love it.
Hmm. And that actually really true with a lot of writers, and people don't realize that too. They think that the spelling is so important for the writer, which is actually spelling is important for editor. Editor are amazing people. I think editors are really amazing people, but because like they just literally they like to go towards those are the people that you see in a Facebook, and they just like everybody who's misspelling something, they jump right on them. I was like, this person is, and some of them I know that there was somebody who was whose profession was something else, and I said like that person just needs to be an editor. It would be perfect. You could take all his frustration about misspelling out on his job or her job, and then he doesn't have to come on Facebook and comment on Facebook people who misspell things.
Yeah, you could take the grammar police and put their anger and frustration to good use by being an editor.
Exactly. So that's the cool thing. So, but you are done. It's just fascinating how people think so mathematically for me. Because when even right now, when we're having a conversation, you point out things in completely different mathematical way. Like you calculate things, and I'm just like we said in the beginning, like you said, the emotions are verbal. So I'm trying to like think of right now, like if I'm more visual or audio. But I think I'm trying to be more. But I know one thing I like writing things out. Before I liked writing things out instead of talking because that was the way I was taught in school. You know, I was taught to write, and now we have more video, and now we learn to instead of just writing, we learn to talk our thoughts out more.
It depends on again your visual sensory preference. So if you're if you're an audio person, but the world has moved to video, one way to use that maybe get a transcript right of the video, print it out, and then you can either read the text or have the or shut the video off, like cover the screen and just listen to the words coming out. That's another way to process. But you bring up a good point about creative people is it's also good not to stifle somebody creative. So if you're a visual person and creative, it helps to just let you spit out all your thoughts and words onto the computer or the page and do not interrupt you for any reason until you're done and you say, okay, I finally got it all out of me. Then you step back and then you can be a little bit more mathematical and logical and say, okay, I spit out these 5,000 words. Which of these are the really important ones that I'm trying to say? So I think there's a huge balance between emotion and math. If we're too logical, we're going to stifle the creatives, right? We have to let the creative people get it out on their time. And then when the time is right, we can come in and say, okay, you, out of these 5,000 words, it seems like you have 2 or 3 really strong points. Let's take that forward. But on the same side, if you start off too mathematical, you remove the creativity out of it, which is bad too, because you don't see everything happening in the universe. You just run into something like, I gotta know, just give me the hack, give me the formula. But then you turn into a cold person, right? I mean, I know I get that way sometimes too. If I don't pick up the emotions in the room and what's going on, and I just walk in and say, I want this, I miss a lot of what's going on. And that can be tough for somebody who's very logical, as you ask them, hey, step back and think about how the sun makes you feel. They look at you like you have two heads. But if you realize, or if the logical person realizes, if you get enough sun, your body produces vitamin D. Vitamin D helps your immune system. Sunlight improves your mood. Then they say, well, holy crap, maybe I should pay attention to the sun. So I think you bring up an excellent point, is there's a very important balance between the creatives and the logical people, and neither should get in the other's way.
Mm-hmm. That makes me think of as well, because a lot of those things that they create, even probably like an airplane or what with rockets and all the things, somebody will come up with idea like how about we'll do this. So that's a creative person, but then he needs, or that person needs, some kind of mathematician coming out, like actually calculating the possibilities, or like the numbers, or the things that they're gonna need, the products that they're gonna need. They're gonna figure out how to do that crazy idea that creative person came up with.
There's an awesome book that talks about what you just mentioned. I forget which book. It covers Disney, and they have the creatives. I think they're called the creatives or the visionaries, and then they have the pragmatists come in, or the realist, I think they call it. So they would send Walt would go off in a room and come up with all these Disney characters and drawings. And he's gone now, but they have other people who do that. And then once they're done, once they've gotten all that out of their system, now they bring in the pragmatist or the realist and saying, okay, how can we make this work, right? It's what part of this is just won't work versus what can we make work? And you bring up a good point about the rockets, is somebody will dream up. Think about the first time, go back in history, somebody said, you know what, I bet we could float or fly through the air.
Yeah.
The pragmatists probably looked at them like they had 3 heads, but once they sketched out their ideas, the logical, cold, mathematical people saying, well, wait, if we think about Bernoulli's principle, which is faster moving air has less pressure, well, if we tilt the back of the wings, the air over the top runs faster than the air over the bottom. The air over the top, therefore, has less pressure. Nature wants to move from higher pressure to lower pressure, so it naturally pulls the plane up. Maybe we can do this. And that's how it starts, right? You have creatives, the logicals, they go at it, they battle, and then they figure it out.
Hmm. I think that's like kind of like the nature has put it together, so this is the way it has to be. Because the logical, oh, that's what I was just thinking. Because the logical mathematical person, he would not think about the creative way, because he just thinks the numbers. But when he hears that the creative, like, well, what if we do something different? And now the mathematical person is able to put the new numbers together.
Yes, yes. And it starts with the sketch. I think the creative person more often than not starts all this with a wild idea, right? Let's float through the air, or let's send a rocket to space.
Or
And
even
then
boats. Like, how do boats move on the water?
right. And once you get it on paper, or you, like you said, write all your ideas down, you give the mathematical person or the logical person time to say, wait, maybe we can do this. And sometimes it's the same person, right? If you have somebody really gifted who has like a Steve Jobs who can see both sides,
Mm-hmm.
but they need to give both sides of their brain time to react. There's a great book called The Technique for Producing Ideas. I think it's like 38 or 40 pages. And one of the steps in that book is after you've immersed yourself in the material, you've puked out all your notes, step back and go do something completely unrelated. Go shower, go on a vacation. And what happens with a lot of geniuses is who have both sides of the brain is the other side will have time to process, and then the flash of genius comes in. Either the creative side when you had the math, or the math when you had the creative. I think it's a balance, and you need both. That's why the world has advanced how it is because we have both types of people.
That made me think about that. That reminded me that saying what people say that you write it out and then you let the universe make it happen. So it's kind of the same, but the same way your own brain starts like after you write it out and you let it, like you said, you let it go. Then your brain starts to figure out like, well, how to make it happen and bits and pieces from everywhere.
Yeah, and that's the subconscious mind. I mean, if people don't get fascinated enough with that, which blows my mind. You breathe, your digestion, everything works when you sleep or when you're not thinking about that. But if you extend that to what you just said, the subconscious is the house for all your beliefs, whether they're limiting or strong beliefs. And then if you start writing down a change of belief and you look at it enough or write it down enough, your subconscious starts believing it. And that puts your behavior in your life on autopilot, which just blows my mind that more people are not fascinated with that you can literally change your reality based on writing affirmations or repeating something to yourself enough times where you rewire the neurons and the connections in your brain where your body will automatically start changing what it does every day to get you to that end point. It blows my mind.
Mm-hmm. Do you like science fiction at all, then?
I read a bit. I mean, I've never been into too much of that. I mean, I dabble occasionally.
I usually didn't read it as much as well. I would just right now I start reading the because the Elon Musk's Grok came out, the one on Twitter, and I was looking up where's the word comes from, and it's the book Stranger in a Strange Land. And I started reading that, and it was just amazed me with what this like the names label science fiction actually means. It's not just fiction, but it's science based fiction. So it was kind of interesting to see there that the connection with that part of it.
Oh, I have to check that out. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting book to read. Really different view of life. It's Stranger in a Strange Land. It's a guy who was born in human who was born in Mars, but then was brought back to Earth.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, I'll look that up.
Yeah, and because I usually don't read science fiction, and that book made me think like maybe I should pay more attention to that thing. So I always thought about it like fiction. I didn't think about that there can actually be science behind some of those things. So,
No, that's fascinating. I'll have to check that out.
mhm. So what's your future plans?
I'm gonna keep developing Math Celebrity and see where it goes. For one, maybe write more books. But what's really pulling my attention is what we talked about at the beginning of the episode, which is the intersection of probability and metaphysics. So things you can do either in meditations or affirmations or experiments that'll literally change your reality. When I talked about Chipotle and free meals and giving up caffeine, once I went down that rabbit hole, I don't think I'll ever come out because it's so cool to know that you can move from being the victim mindset or what they call affect, living in effect, which is what most people on this planet do. They wait for things to happen to them and then they react, to the cause side, which is if I make these shifts, it influences the probability of the cause, which then influences the effect. So that's where I'm living right now, and I don't see ever getting away from that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You and I were like right now. You were putting manifesting in mathematical terms.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm working on a book right now called, the rough title is Thought Equations. It's basically manifesting equations in math.
Mm-hmm.
So that's hilarious. You just mentioned that. I just started writing that recently.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. I would be interested reading that book as well. Well, we had a good conversation. That's why I'm saying people have to start. That's why it's human intelligence, because even that artificial intelligence is so fascinating. I think we still have to keep up human intelligence as well and have conversations. People have to get together and just have conversations about random things.
I had a great time. It's always good to talk to you, and I love these discussions. So thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dan, so much. And for the viewers, just keep that human intelligence alive as well. We use artificial intelligence. We don't let the artificial intelligence to use us. That's the main goal. So thank you, Dan, so much for being in the show, and thank you everybody who are watching. If you have any comments, leave them below, and hopefully you're gonna watch the upcoming episodes as well. Thank you.
Thank you.